in general, what I've
Yes.
seen is that, well, people will eat even like a 16-ounce steak. They get to the point where they're like, I cannot eat
Yeah.
anymore. But that never happens with like ice cream or any of these other kinds of foods.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. I totally agree with you there. Yeah.
What I'm interested in asking you too is there's a lot of references made to the notion of moderation versus abstinence, and a lot of people. I found some of this work through Gretchen Rubin, and her work. She talks a lot about this and how abstinence for many people is easier than
Yeah.
perfect moderation, just total abstinence. And you must see that a lot, in working with various addictions. But why do you think it is that there are some people who are born or come into this world, someone like myself or others who've dealt with food addiction, where they can't just have that, like, I became a candy addict from a very, very young age. Like, I was my coping mechanism, food addiction, all of that. But there were other people around me who didn't have that, same reaction to food, or they're someone who can have
Yes.
a couple pieces of cake and they're good and walk away, or they
Yes.
can have a few pieces of chocolate and they're totally fine. And you know I guess in the same way, I could have a glass of wine and be done with it. I don't really drink alcohol much, but there are differences in people, and what makes someone maybe more susceptible or less, or do you see that much in terms of like people that you work with who have addiction, and comparing that to those who don't develop any
Oh
kind
yeah, I mean that's a pretty crucial distinction. So what makes an alcoholic from a heavy drinker or a recreational drinker? It goes back to our discussion about dopamine and dopamine 2 receptors. So you mentioned early on that you were a candy addict. So that tells me that early on, I'm assuming as a child,
of.
you already had maybe a heightened response, a bigger response to a dopamine like sugar than somebody else who might have just been able to take it or leave it. I mean, we all have sweet tooths, but some more than others, and that might be the genetic piece, that you were born with a more sensitive dopamine response. I don't know. So the alcoholic might say, yeah, in my first drunk, it was great, but I got so sick. And their buddy got so sick and never had it again, but they was like, so well, I'm going to have it again on the weekend. So there's potentially a bigger response. I think you also mentioned, like, science. More and more people are recognizing that food is addictive, but is there an actual food addiction syndrome? And that's the piece I want to say, yes, there is, because I don't know about you specifically, but it could be you, certainly me. At a certain point, there was no way I could just have basically moderation, because it was no longer that food was addictive, but now my dopamine receptors had changed enough that even if I'm abstinent, which is easier. So, I mean, when somebody says that, that tells me they've already got this template of addiction. If it's easier to not have than to moderate, go with it. That is your intuitive sense saying, don't. Um, anyway, so if you're at that stage of having this heightened response, even if you're abstinent, I think that there is a change. The dopamine receptors have changed. You may recalibrate back, but it's kind of like, once you're a diabetic, you're always a diabetic, even if your sugars are normal. You're going to have a quick response if you have sugar. Your sugars will go back up to 25 or 30, whereas somebody else, they won't. Something is still abnormal. And I don't know if we know what that is. Is that the dopamine 2 receptors? I don't know. But we also use the word kindling. There's changes that have happened. And the best the person who has already been addicted can do is remain abstinent. And this is why in the addiction world we say, I am a recovering addict. I'm not recovered. Because there is always the potential, if I pick up, that I'm back. It's like I'm a diabetic, even though I'm functional and my sugars are normal. So I do think that there's a syndrome, and that some of us are on that, which means we use in the addiction world, once you're a pickle, you can never be a cucumber. You can't go back.
Right.
And that means you can't do this concept of moderation.